Welcome to Education Forum. I'm Herman Badillo, Chairman of the Board of Trustees of the City University. The improvement of education affects all New Yorkers. This program will focus on the key educational issues and challenges before us all. My guest today is Jill Levy, who is the President of the Council of Supervisors and Administrators of the City of New York. And she was born in New York City. She's a graduate of Bronx High School of Science, and she is a product of the City University to a large extent because she got a degree at Queens and a master's degree at Hunter College. She only recently became the president of the Supervisors and Administrators. Is that right?
That's correct.
And who exactly are the supervisors and administrators in the public school system?
We are the school principals, assistant principals, specialty supervisors, education administrators. We also represent the directors of city-funded daycare centers. Big membership, 5,500 members, school leaders throughout the system, difficult jobs, as you well know, great responsibility, taking on more and more accountability as we move forward in these years.
Now, the newspapers are full of stories about the shortage of teachers now and the future shortage of teachers, something like 54,000 teachers over the next few years. Is there a shortage of principals and administrators? And if so, what is the nature of the problem?
On the national basis, the national scene, all of our urban centers and now some of our suburban centers are reporting that they are getting fewer and fewer candidates for principalships and many fewer candidates for vice principals, or as we call them here in New York City, assistant principals. Yeah. Correct. And that is a growing number. And of course it emanates from a variety of different issues. One is that when you have teacher vacancies, of course you're not getting people coming up through the teacher ranks who want to assume the responsibilities for schools. And secondarily, in many cases, administrators and supervisors are making less than teachers. That is not the case any longer here in New York City. It was up until our last contract. Also, the amount of responsibility and accountability that falls upon school administrators, principals, assistant principals, people in district offices, administrators, is growing in leaps and bounds. And frankly, the systems, the bureaucracies, while they give lip service to the importance of these positions, rarely, if ever, commend and support people who come into the ranks.
Now, you represent the assistant principals and principals. Do you represent the community superintendents too?
No.
They are management.
They are management.
Okay. Now, how does a person get to be an assistant principal and principal? What are the requirements?
Requirements from the state are that you have to have postgraduate certification as a school administrator and supervisor from New York State, and that's a requirement of a certification from a university, and you have to have an internship as a supervisor.
To be an assistant principal?
To be an assistant principal,
and
correct.
How do you become a principal?
And to become a principal, the board requires a 3-year assistant principalship or other supervisory or administrative role prior to becoming a principal. But that has often been waived, that requirement, because we are so hard-pressed to find people to take principalships that oftentimes they reduce the years of service.
That's similar to the problem for teachers, because there's a requirement that teachers be certified, but there are many teachers who are teaching even though they are uncertified. Is there a large number of assistant principals and principals who are uncertified?
Well, we don't have at the moment anybody who I know that is uncertified, but we do have people who have not had that 3-year experience as a supervisor or administrator coming into the ranks of principals. We have some people who come in from teacher lines. It's very, very difficult. The responsibilities, the requirements, the skills and knowledges are very different from a classroom teacher. So we're seeing people coming in and going out. We're beginning to see some revolving doors. We're also seeing fewer and fewer applicants. That concerns us greatly. And the years of experience that people are coming with, even teaching experience, is lower and lower. So
Well, why are there fewer and fewer applicants?
there are fewer and fewer applicants because of the tremendous responsibility that these people have to take. Also, you have in the teacher ranks themselves, as you well stated, we have a dearth, if you will, of certified teachers. And that's who you want to come into your assistant principalships. And they don't want the job because they are making almost as much as an assistant principal is with different kinds of responsibilities, and they don't want to assume the additional responsibilities of an assistant principalship. And many assistant principals do not wish to go on to being principals, so the number of candidates you have is significantly depressed.
Now, you referred to the recent contract that was agreed upon. Mm-hmm. As I understand it, that was a very dramatic change because principal tenure was eliminated. Is that correct?
Depends upon how you define principal tenure.
Tell me.
Tenure was used as a buzzword politically to say the following, I believe. We need to streamline the process. The process that was currently in place under state education law was long and tedious and did not really serve management well, nor did it serve the system well in many cases. And secondly, it was a buzzword for lifelong jobs, which it was never intended to be. It was simply intended to be a probationary period after which you got due process under the law. So it became politicized in a way that was very difficult then to come to the table and have an agreement over it. The result was that we did streamline the due process, that we did in fact put our due process into our contract as opposed to in the state law that defines
so what is
tenure.
So if somebody's a principal today, does that person remain as a principal under tenure, or is that person subject to review up to 3 years?
No. If that person finishes a probationary period of 3 years, that person then gets all of their due process rights, which are different than in the tenure law. They are contained within our contract. Those due process rights call for a fair hearing. They call for an evaluation based upon principal's performance review, which is a heavy-duty evaluation instrument that this union agreed to a number of years ago with the Board of Education. So in essence, they have tenure, if tenure is defined as probationary period after which you get due process rights.
And who makes the evaluation?
The superintendent makes the evaluation of principals.
The community superintendent.
The community superintendent. And for assistant principals, then it's the principal who makes that evaluation.
And when, so we still don't know what the effect of this change in the contract will be. It'll take a few years to see what happens.
It's too soon, first of all, to evaluate how well the instrument, the evaluation instrument, is being used by superintendents. It was intended to be a highly technical but supportive document. So that process will take, I think, about 2 or 3 years before we see how people are going to use it. And then we'll see what the result will be in terms of turnover. We expect that if the instrument is used properly, there will be less and less turnover because there's always opportunities within that process to make things better, to support. One of the issues that we are terribly concerned with is the support of our principals and our assistant principals once they get into the schools. There is a lot of money spent on teacher development, as it should be. It should be there. But there's very, very little spent on appropriate professional development for school leadership. And as the system demands more managerial skills and more interpersonal skills and more instructional skills, the system has to make certain that its lead people have those skills, and it has not done that.
There was a recent article that said that the Wallace Reader's Digest funds had awarded a $3.9 million grant to the State Education Department to help pay for programs to train and recruit school principals and superintendents. Will that help to solve the problem you're talking about?
I certainly hope it will. Frankly, it's not a lot of money, but it is certainly something we have not had before.
So who's going to administer this program, the Board of Regents or the Board of Education?
That's a very good question.
Don't know?
Don't know. Don't know because there is always the tension between the parties. And we have been, for a long time, research has shown us that when people control their own professional development to a certain extent, when you reach a certain level, you should be able to control your own professional development and have professional development also part of your evaluation process. It has historically been the system who provides the service, the system being either the Board of Education, the community superintendent, or the state education department making demands upon those systems. We have been trying to build a consortium of providers, a consortium of thinkers, a consortium of interests that would oversee how that money gets ultimately spent.
Couldn't you develop something, let's say, through us at the City University in one of the colleges or the graduate center? Because it seems to me it should be it's something that apparently everyone agrees needs to be done.
At this moment, I love you dearly. I have to tell you that we are working with the City University of New York Research. We have developed many programs with them, the Research Foundation, and have spoken often about a relationship for ongoing professional development. It has always been on my table and my agenda that the most important parties in the City of New York for professional development for our members, the school principals and assistant principals by and large, should be the City University of New York, which provides so many of our teachers who then become our administrators, and the Board of Education, and the union that represents these people, plus any CBOs that actually have proven themselves in the field of professional development management.
Well, as you know, we just approved a dean for teacher education because I was concerned that at some of the colleges, many of the students who got a degree in education could not pass the teacher's exam. And the last results that were published indicated that we have progressed in at least 4 of the colleges, and we still have a ways to go at City College and Medgar Evers, but we are moving up. But seems to me that from there, the logical step is to look at the question of how we can treat principals and assistant principals and other supervisors.
I absolutely would concur with that, and as soon as we can get to work on it, it would be wonderful. I'm available to do that work, and I have wonderful people in the office who are available to do that.
Okay, we're available too, and we'll continue after these announcements.
Do you think you have the power to change the world?
I can shape the future, one child at a time.
I know I can make a difference in those children's lives, and I know I have.
Who knows where my influence may stop?
I teach.
I teach.
I teach.
Yes, they're teachers, but to the kids they reach, they're heroes.
I think I have the power to change the world. The influence is always there.
Do you have the power to wake up young minds, to be someone's hero, to change someone's life? Reach for that power. Teach. If you want to make an impact on our future, call 1-800-45-TEACH. Want to change the world?
I teach. I teach.
I teach.
I teach. I teach.
Be a teacher. Be a hero.
We're back today with Jill Levy, who is the president of the Council of Supervisors and Administrators in the Board of Education of the City of New York. Now, let's talk about what's going on with the so-called SIR schools, the schools which have not been performing and which are under review by the Board of Regents. There are 87 such schools in New York City, and much of the attention has been paid to what the principals are doing to improve those schools. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I could tell you that everybody in those schools is committed to hard work, and they are working very, very hard on behalf of their student population and their community in the schools. Again, we have some very, very new principals, really raw principals who are in the SIR schools.
Why isn't it possible to get more experienced principals going into the SIR schools instead of getting new principals? Because if the schools have not been performing for years, wouldn't it be better to take some principals who have 5 or 10 years experience and put them into those schools?
I certainly think so. About 5 years ago or 6 years ago, this union put forth a proposal that would enable master principals, if you will, people who wish to and were credible to go into those difficult schools and perform there in those schools and train new principals ultimately, if they choose to leave those schools, to train new principals. The Board of Education rejected that proposal, and it has never been.
How long ago was that?
It was about 5 or 6 years ago.
Maybe Chancellor Levy might want to review that proposal again.
We've had some discussions about it.
Now tell me, why is it that so many schools have been failing and have been failing consistently over the years to the point where the Board of Regents has put them under special scrutiny?
Many people out in the community are not going to like what I have to say about that issue. But there is not a community in the city of New York that did not know that it had 1 or 2 failing schools within its midst. We believed that the new governance proposal, when it removed school boards from the political agendas in the district, would free up the superintendent then to go in and address those needs. Sometimes schools were dumping grounds for students. Sometimes they were schools in areas where the community school board did not have political entree, so they were the less favored places. Some districts were the less favored districts, if you will. And that did not happen, however. They should have redistricted those schools a long time ago. They should have looked at their entering policies. They should have been looking at the feeder schools, the elementary schools that fed into the middle school level, and have done something really dramatic about changing the way they did business. Instead, it was business as usual for years.
Okay, but has the change in the law, which took place a couple of years ago, to take away some of the power from the school boards and give that power to the chancellor so that he can now refuse to approve community superintendents, has that helped the problem?
I think what it has allowed the chancellor to do is to go in and make demands upon the community superintendents. And I think the issue here is when you evaluate a community superintendent in light of how the schools are doing in the district, then it would be foolhardy for a community superintendent to continue doing business as usual. He or she would have to do something, otherwise they will no longer have their positions.
Okay, but let's say that you became the chancellor and you had the authority to address the problem in those schools that are not performing. What would you do?
First thing that I would do in those schools is I would look at feeder patterns in those schools. Where are the youngsters coming from in those schools?
Let's say many of those schools are in areas like the South Bronx, and that's where they come from.
But they're not all failing schools. Even in the South Bronx, we have some wonderful, wonderful schools. Within districts, we have schools that are high-performing and schools that are not. So first I would look at, let's take a district that I know in Brooklyn, which shall remain nameless, but I know it well. And it is in a low-performing district, a very difficult district that has had school board problems for many, many years, and still has school board involvement in places perhaps where it should not be involved. But having said that, if I were the superintendent in that district, I would take a look, and the first thing that I would see is that I have a school for the talented and gifted in that district. Well, that school for the talented and gifted is taking students away from their other schools and leaving the other schools with the average youngster and below average youngster. So that's one of the things I would look at and say to myself.
And what would you do? Take the kids back from the talented and gifted school and put them in the regular schools?
I would try to do talented and gifted or other programs within my schools that would draw upon the interest, the skills, and the desires of the community, the students, and the parents in each and every one of my schools. And that's where I would put my resources and my training and my public relations. And the other piece of it is we don't do good public relations for our schools and within our communities. We need parent training, parent education, and I would put a lot of time and effort into pounding on doors and bringing parents into the mix. Because the first thing we know, and you know, is that without parents' interest, Youngsters do not do well in school generally.
Well, you said parent training. What would you train the parents for?
Parenting. Parenting and how to negotiate the system. First of all, parenting. When your youngster comes home from school, how do you prepare a place for that youngster to do homework? How do you assist and support the youngster, not necessarily in the skills, but in getting the answers? What resources available to you so that you can get help for your child? Certainly with community-based organizations where there's a lot of services to be tapped into for parents who are needy. I would put more guidance counselors in the schools.
Okay, but let's go back to parent training. Why cannot that be done now? It doesn't require any changes in the law.
It can be done now. It's a matter of funding and going out and finding the resources and the funding to do parent training. It's a matter of using the schools in a productive way for that. And then there's the matter of attracting those parents who resist coming into schools because they don't feel comfortable navigating the system. They are not made to feel welcome because of language or cultural differences, because it's not a welcoming environment for them. It's frightening to them. Many people are immigrant parents. They don't begin to know how to be comfortable.
Right. So what kind of funding would be required, and who would do it? Would it be done by the principals and administrators?
No, I think we would have to find community-based organizations who are skilled in reaching out to parents and tapping into their strengths, but that should not be separated from the roles and responsibilities of principals and assistant
principals. But there are such programs in the communities. There's so-called poverty programs, which have had their names changed, but they basically are funded by the federal government and the state and the city. Why couldn't those existing organizations, which I know exist in every area, whether it's Brooklyn or the South Bronx or Harlem or East Harlem, why could not there be a tie-in with those agencies which, as far as I know, are not doing that much now?
There should be a tie-in with them. And again, that's a question for the community superintendents and in those districts. And as I said, if I were the community superintendent, that's exactly where I would be looking, to see what is available and tap into every possibility. And certainly with the central board, as you probably know, Chancellor Levy has set up a business community relationship that's getting off the ground. And I'd like to see where that takes us, because I think that that's a source of great bonding between those agencies and the schools. And the school
where would
system.
you like it to take us?
I would like to see more. One of the things for my members, and I will speak about that only, is that the business community has a lot to offer in management training. The business community spends a fortune in training their middle management in management skills. I would like to see the business community take on that kind of training for our principals and our assistant principals. When I speak of management skills, I'm speaking of how to use resources, human resources administration, personnel, human relations, communication skills, technological skills, all of the skills that go with a good management training program. That's where I'd like to see the business community, because if you don't train your leaders to do the job properly in those areas, then you're not building a cadre of strong leadership in the city.
We're talking about management skills. What is the relationship now between the assistant principals and the principals and the teachers? Because from a practical point of view, in business, they would be called the assistant principals and principals, the middle management, right? So what would you say is the present relationship?
I'm not sure, how to answer that question. The present relationship between the principal and the assistant principal has to be one of a partnership, because the assistant principal, in essence, is carrying out the mission and the responsibilities that the principal assigns to the assistant principal.
And then the teachers?
And then to the teachers. The assistant principal is the foundation of instructional management in this school system. They have to support the teachers. They have to be the role models for teachers instructionally. That's their job. They are not deans. They are not people who have to deal with should not be dealing with dean issues, should not be dealing with guidance issues. We should have enough deans and guidance counselors and secretaries so that they don't have to do it. They should be dealing with instruction, modeling lessons, going into classrooms, talking to teachers, developing professional development programs for the teachers.
Are they doing that now?
Oh, they certainly are. The problem is that because there aren't enough of the other support services, and there certainly are not enough assistant principals to go around, they are spending too much time on administrivia and on deans and child discipline and parent involvement than they ought to be doing. And that's a problem the system has always had. It freed up teachers from administrative periods in their last contract, as you well know, and never really replaced personnel to do those jobs, and that has fallen upon our principals and our assistant principals to be monitors in the hallway, monitors in the lunchroom, monitors in the schoolyard. If it's not good for teachers, then it surely isn't good for middle management and supervisory positions as well. So we have to deal with that.
Okay. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.